Look at the crowd first. That is where the eye goes, because that is where the light is. A summer afternoon, somewhere in the pressed and jostling human mass of a great exposition, and the photographer has caught perhaps 200 faces in a single plate, men in bowler hats and stiff collars, women beneath the wide brims and dark ribbons of 1889, children clutching at skirts, a boy mid-stride, a vendor's arm lifted and smeared into a ghost by the length of the exposure. Everything in this photograph moves. Everything is caught in the small blurs of ordinary life, the tilt of a head, the shift of a foot, the breath of a body that could not hold still for the long, open eye of the wet plate lens. Everything blurs, except 5 figures at the center. You see them slowly. That is the strange mercy of this image. It does not shout at you. It lets you find them the way the crowd itself must have found them, by degrees, by the wrongness that gathers at the edge of comprehension before the mind will name it. First, you notice only that the horizon of hats is uneven, that somewhere in the middle of that sea of heads, the line rises. And then you understand that it does not rise because those people stand on something. It rises because they are taller, a full head and shoulders taller than every soul around them, not one of them. 5. 5 figures, standing close together in the manner of a family posed, and I use that word deliberately because that is what the arrangement is. There is a tallest one at the back, and I have come to think of that one as the father, though nothing in the photograph tells me so. There is a second nearly as tall beside him, and before them 3 smaller, though smaller here means only that their crowns reach the shoulders of the 2 behind, and their shoulders still float above the crowd like buoys above a tide. A family, standing in the open, in the middle of a public exposition, in daylight, in front of thousands, and they are still. I want you to hold on to that, because it is the detail that broke something in me the first time I understood it. Every human being in this photograph is faintly blurred, because a wet collodion plate in 1889 demanded stillness the living body cannot fully give, a fraction of a second here, a slow second there, and the flesh betrays itself, the chest rises, the eye flickers, the weight rocks. The crowd around these 5 is a field of soft motion, but the 5 are sharp. Sharp as the ticket booth behind them, sharp as the iron gas lamp, sharp as the dead architecture which cannot move because it is not alive. They held a stillness that stone holds. They held it long enough that the silver caught every edge of them without a tremor, while children 2 feet away smeared into smoke. Look at the faces. This is where the calm leaves you. The faces are long, not long in the way a tall man's face is long, drawn out by good fortune and glands. Long in a proportion that the eye rejects, the distance from brow to chin stretched past what a human skull should permit, the jaw narrow and tapering, the cheeks flat and without the roundness of expression. The heads themselves are narrow, almost compressed at the temples, rising to a high and gaunt crown. And beneath the long brows, the eyes, I cannot tell you their colour. The plate gives only the grey of silver salts, but I can tell you they are open and level and directed, and that not one of the 5 is smiling, not one mouth is turned. 5 long faces, unsmiling, held perfectly still above a moving crowd, and every one of them looking in the same direction, not at the camera, not at each other, but upward and slightly away, at something beyond the frame. The limbs are wrong too, once you accept the rest. The arms hang too far down the body. The hands, where you can find them, are pale and narrow and seem to have too much length between wrist and fingertip. One of the smaller figures has an arm raised, and the arm bends where an arm should, at the elbow, and yet the segment below the elbow runs longer than the segment above it, and the human frame does not do that. It is a small thing. It is the kind of small thing that, once you have seen it, you cannot stop seeing. I have spent a long time with this photograph. I have enlarged it until the silver grain dissolves into a storm of black and white, and there is nothing left to find, and then pulled back until the family stands whole again in the center of the crowd, sharp and tall and patient. And I will tell you honestly what I keep returning to. It is not the height. Height alone could be a trick, I know that, and we will come to the men who insist it is nothing more. It is the stillness paired with the height. A hoax can make a man look tall. A hoax cannot make a wet plate hold 5 figures in stone-sharp focus inside a moving crowd, unless those 5 figures did not move, did not breathe, did not shift, did not sway. Through the whole long open second the crowd could not endure. They are undeniably present. That is the thing I have to keep saying to myself, because everything else about them argues for a fabrication, and yet the image refuses it. They are cast in the same silver, lit by the same afternoon sun, throwing shadows that fall the same way the gas lamp's shadow falls and the ticket booth's shadow falls. They stand on the same ground. The crowd presses close around them and does not part in fear. Bodies lean toward them, faces near them turn upward, and I will have a great deal to say later about those upturned faces, because they are the proof that whatever this was, it was seen, in the flesh, by people who were there. This is not a figure painted onto a plate. This is not a cutout. This is 5 bodies standing in a real place on a real day in the summer of 1889, present in the light, and taller than anything human has a right to be. And so the first question is the simplest one, and the one that will not let me sleep. Who stood at that camera and pressed the bulb and watched these 5 hold still while the whole world blurred around them, and what did that person think they were photographing? Before I ask that question fully, I have to do the slow work, the work I have spent weeks on, the work that is the only honest way to know whether what I am looking at is real. Because your eye lies to you in a photograph. It fills in what it expects. It tells you the tall figures are tall because your mind has already decided they are strange, and then it stops measuring. So I stopped trusting my eye. I took the plate, the highest resolution scan I could obtain, and I will tell you later exactly how it came to me. And I measured. I measured against the things in the frame that cannot lie, the ordinary furniture of a fairground that was built to a known human scale. Start with the ticket booth. It stands at the left edge of the crowd, a small clapboard structure with a shuttered window and a shingled canopy, the kind that stood at the entrance of every exposition midway in the American 1880s. That window is cut to a standard height. A clerk sat behind it and passed tickets through to men and women standing on the ground outside. We know from the trade catalogues of fairground carpentry that survived from that decade that such a serving window sat between 4 feet and 4.5 feet from the ground, built so a standing adult could reach it comfortably without bending. In the photograph, an ordinary man stands at that window with his hand raised to it, and his hand meets it just below his chest, exactly as it should. His head clears the canopy's lower edge by perhaps a hand's width. He is, by every proportion in the frame, an ordinary man of the period, 5'7", 5'8", no more. Now move your eye 8 feet to the right, to the nearest of the 5. He does not clear the canopy by a hand's width. His shoulders are level with its shingled peak. His head rises above the roofline of the booth entirely, above the line where the sky begins, so that against the pale afternoon he is silhouetted where every other head in the crowd is set against the dark mass of bodies and canvas behind. Run the arithmetic that the booth forces on you, and it is merciless. If that window is 4 feet from the ground, and the ordinary man's chest meets it, and the tall one's shoulders meet the canopy peak, then the tall one's shoulders stand somewhere near 7.5 feet from the ground. His crown stands higher. I measured it 3 times, on 3 different days, hoping each time to have made an error. I did not make an error. The nearest of the 5 stands close to 8 feet tall, and he is not the tallest of them. Then there is the gas lamp. It rises on its iron standard just behind the group, a fluted post topped by a glass lantern, and gas lamp standards of that manufacture. I found the pattern in an 1886 municipal lighting catalogue, cast by a foundry in Cleveland, were set at a fixed height, the lamp itself riding at 9 feet, so the flame cleared the heads of the tallest man on horseback. That 9-foot lantern is the one fixed ruler in the whole scene that I can trust to the inch. And the tallest of the 5, the one standing at the centre with the narrow head, reaches it, not near it, reaches it. The top of his skull sits level with the base of the glass lantern, which means that figure stands close to 9 feet from the ground, and I have checked and rechecked, and there is no way to make the shadows or the perspective forgive it. So that is the height, established not by wonder, but by carpentry and cast iron. But height, I keep telling you, is the least of it. Look at the limbs. An ordinary tall man, and tall men existed then as now, men of 6.5 feet, men who drew stairs, is built in our proportions. The arm reaches to mid-thigh. The head is a certain fraction of the body. These 5 are not built in our proportions. The arms are too long for the bodies they hang from. In the nearest figure, the fingertips fall below the knee, a reach that on a human frame would be a deformity remarked upon by every physician who saw it. And here it is repeated across all 5, identical, as if it were simply how their kind is made. The forearms are long. The hands, where you can see them, are long and narrow, the fingers tapering past what a glove would fit. And the legs beneath the long, dark coats they wear, for they are dressed plainly in the sober coats of the period, which is its own strange detail. The legs are drawn out, the stride they would take unimaginable, the whole lower body stretched as though the same hand that made them tall had pulled once more at the ends of them. And the heads. I have spent longer on the heads than on any other part of this image. They are narrow. Not narrow as a thin man's face is narrow, but narrow in the bone, the skull itself elongated, rising to a height above the brow that no hat in the frame would fit, the jaw drawn down long, and the whole face lengthened as if seen in a slightly warped glass. Except the glass is not warped because every ordinary face beside them is rendered true. The men at the booth have round human heads. The women in the crowd have round human heads under their summer bonnets. Only these 5 carry the long, narrow skull, and they carry it without expression, the mouth straight, the eyes deep and unreadable in the silver, looking not at the camera, but slightly up and away, all 5 in nearly the same direction. And then, the stillness. I come back to it because the plate forces me back to it. A wet Collodion exposure on a bright fair afternoon in 1889 ran long by our standards. A second, perhaps 2, the photographer counting under his breath while the crowd did what every crowd does, which is fail to hold. And so the crowd is a smear. Look at any ordinary figure in that frame and you see the ghosting of motion, a turned shoulder doubled, a child's arm dissolved into blur, a hat brim smeared where the head tipped. Everything human in that photograph is caught mid-movement, softened, betrayed by its own small restlessness, because a living body of our kind cannot hold perfectly still through 2 open seconds. It simply cannot. The heartbeat alone moves it. The 5 are sharp. Every one of them, sharp as the iron lamppost, sharp as the shuttered window, sharp as the dead, unmoving wood of the booth. The fabric of their coats shows its weave. The long fingers show their joints. The narrow faces show the line of the mouth and the shadow beneath the brow, with a clarity that only stillness, total, sustained, inhuman stillness, could give a plate of that era. They did not sway. They did not shift their weight from foot to foot, as a man does without knowing it. They did not breathe in any way the silver could catch. For the length of that exposure, while every living person around them betrayed themselves with motion, these 5 stood like the lamppost stood, like the building stood, as though whatever animated them did not run on the small, ceaseless tremor that runs through us. That is what the measuring gives you, when you set aside the wonder and do the arithmetic. Not a tall family, not a curiosity of glands or a trick of the lens. 5 figures of impossible height, wrong in the length of their limbs, wrong in the shape of their skulls, and wrong, most of all wrong, in their capacity to be still where nothing living stays still. And the man behind the camera watched them do it. He watched them hold, and he named them, and that name is the first thread I pulled that began to come loose in my hand. The name is in his own hand, and I have held the page that carries it. His name was Elias Warden Cobb, a commercial photographer of Rochester by trade, who worked the Eastern fairs and expositions through the 1880s, selling cabinet portraits and stereographic views at $1 apiece. He kept a working ledger, every itinerant photographer did, a plain calf-bound book in which he logged each exposure by date, by plate number, by subject, so that orders could be filled and prints matched to their negatives weeks later when he was 3 towns away. It is a dull document, a tradesman's inventory, page after page of Mr. and Mrs. H. Dell, family group, 4 heads, and livestock pavilion, prize heifer, 2 views. And then, on the entry dated the 4th of September 1889, plate 141, the hand changes. Not the handwriting, the pressure. He bore down. The ink pooled at the downstrokes, and what he wrote was not a name and a count of heads. What he wrote was, the long kindred, would not be paid, would not give a name, stood for the plate without asking, God keep them from the second sitting. I have read that line more times than I can honestly tell you. Every clause in it is strange. A commercial photographer did not photograph strangers for free. The whole apparatus of his trade was the sale, the deposit, the order taken in advance. Yet he made the exposure and took no coin. They gave no name, so he gave them one, and the name he chose, the long kindred, is the name of a man reaching for a word that does not exist for a thing he does not understand. And that last clause, God keep them from the second sitting, as though a second was expected, as though something in that 2-second stillness had told him there would be or could be a return. Cobb's ledger survives because it was never meant to matter. It passed, after his death, into a box of trade ephemera bought at a state auction in 1911, moved through 2 dealers, and came to rest uncatalogued in the manuscript holdings of a small historical society in western New York, where I found it filed under the innocent heading Photographic Account Books, Miscellaneous. You can request it. The finding aid lists it. But I want you to hold in your mind what happened to the man who wrote it, because the ledger is only the first thread, and the others are worse. Elias Cobb did not photograph the Eastern fairs in 1890. He did not photograph anything again that I can trace. The Rochester City Directory lists him as photographer every year from 1878 through 1889, and then, in the 1890 edition, the occupation beside his name reads simply, none. He was 41 years old. There is a notice, 4 lines, in the Rochester Union and Advertiser of March 1890, reporting that Mr. E. W. Cobb had been confined some weeks by a nervous complaint following his return from the autumn exhibitions, and had given up the photographic business on the advice of his physician. A nervous complaint, confined some weeks, following his return. He lived another 19 years and never, as far as any record I can find shows, made another plate. The man whose whole life was capturing light onto silver put down the camera the winter after he photographed the long kindred and did not lift it again. He was not the only one. There was a clerk. Every exposition of that scale kept a registry of pavilions and concessions, a booking office where every tent and stall on the grounds was recorded with its lot number, its proprietor, and the fee paid, and the man who kept that book for the 1889 fair was named Chester A. Pride, an assistant secretary to the exhibition committee. 29 years old, careful, literate, the kind of minor functionary whose neat hand fills the margins of every organized event. In the surviving concession register, and a portion of it does survive, in the county archive, water-stained and incomplete, there is an entry for a pavilion in the northeast quarter of the grounds, Lot 47, that carries no proprietor's name, no fee, and no trade. Where every other line names a thing sold or shown, German bakery, wax tableau, electrical marvels, admission 5 cents. Lot 47 says only, in Pride's careful hand, the tall party, C committee, do not book adjoining. Do not book adjoining. Someone had decided that whatever stood on Lot 47 should have empty ground around it. Pride wrote a letter. I have a transcription of it, made by a local historian in the 1930s from an original that is now lost, and in it, Pride describes to a cousin in Buffalo the difficulty of the northeast lot, the family of great stature who occupied it without payment and whom the committee will not discuss, and his own growing unease at being made to keep 2 sets of figures, one for the public accounts and one, he writes, for the gentleman who came down from the State Association and asked that certain matters not appear. Then the letter turns. In the final paragraph, Pride complains of headaches, of a ringing in the ears that began, the evening I stood some minutes near the northeast pavilion, of sleep broken by a sensation of being measured. He died in the spring of 1891. The cause given was brain fever. He was 31. You begin to see the shape of it. It is not the height that unsettles me now, though the height is impossible. It is the pattern that trails behind the sighting like a wake behind a hull. The photographer, confined, silenced, finished. The clerk, headaches, a ringing that began where he stood too close, dead within 18 months. And there are others, thinner, harder to hold. A stereograph dealer named Fenn, who advertised views of the marvels of the late exposition in a Syracuse paper in October 1889, and whose advertisement never ran a second week. A committee member, one Josiah Ambrose, who resigned for reasons of health that same autumn and moved his family to Ohio. The exhibition's own official photographic contractor, whose promised commemorative album of the fair was announced, subscribed, paid for in advance by hundreds, and never delivered, never printed, never explained. None of these people, on their own, is a mystery. Men fell ill in 1889. Businesses failed. Nervous complaints and brain fever filled the death columns of every American city, and I will not pretend that a headache and a resignation prove anything at all. But I have spent a long time with lists of the dead and the departed, and I know what randomness looks like on a page, and this is not randomness. This is a circle drawn around a single object. Everyone who logged the long kindred, everyone who booked their ground, everyone who tried to sell their image or set their name to paper, fell silent by illness, by ruin, by a physician's advice, by a quiet visit from gentlemen who came down from the State Association and asked that certain matters not appear. The stillness the plate caught in those 5 bodies was not confined to the plate. It spread outward into the lives of the men who saw them, and it made of every one of those men a closed door. And the thing about a wake made deliberately, a silence engineered rather than fallen into by chance, is that it always leaves the same fingerprint. It goes for the record first. The record was the first thing to die. I have followed enough vanished cases to know the order in which paper disappears, and it is never random either. It goes for the index before the entry. It goes for the finding aid before the folder. Somewhere in the New York State Archives, in the papers of the Fair's Organizing Association, there should be a bound registry of pavilion assignments for the season of 1889. Every stall, every sideshow, every temperance booth and lemonade stand ruled off in the clerk's own hand. That registry survives. I have held its microfilm surrogate. And on the leaf where the Western concessions were entered, where our clerk's ledger tells us the long kindred were given ground between the poultry hall and the machinery annex, there is a line that has been cut away, not scratched out, not inked over. Cut, a clean rectangular excision, a window of missing paper, and the 2 pages fanned back together so the loss reads as a binder's error unless you hold the film to the light and count the ruled lines that no longer meet. The negatives went the same way. The photographer who logged them as the long kindred kept a studio numbering system, I have reconstructed most of it from surviving cabinet cards that turn up in estate sales and dealer boxes to this day, each stamped with a sequential plate number on the reverse. The sequence runs clean through the summer of 1889. Then, across 4 numbers, the exact span the crowd would have occupied on that afternoon, there is nothing. No prints have ever surfaced from those 4 plates. The glass itself, if it survived his death, passed to a nephew, then to a barn in Onondaga County, then to a house fire in 1931 that the local paper called a total loss. The one image we have, the image that opened all of this, survived only because it was never his to destroy. It was a duplicate, pulled by a rival operator, filed wrong, forgotten in a lot of unrelated views, and rediscovered a century later by someone who had no idea what he was looking at, and no reason to be afraid of it. That is how a thing gets erased in a country with no Ministry of Secrets and no midnight police. Not by conspiracy in the sense the word has curdled into, not by a room of men signing an order, but by 100 small, deniable acts, each one reasonable on its own, a page a binder trimmed, a plate that broke in the wash, an album the subscribers were quietly refunded for, a photographer's estate that burned, a clerk who died young, a committeeman who wanted the country air of Ohio. No single act is suspicious. The pattern is the crime. And the pattern only becomes visible when you do what almost no one does, which is to lay all of it side by side and refuse to look away from the shape it makes. I owe you the other side. I have promised it since the beginning, and this is where honesty costs the most. The skeptics have a case, and it is a good one, and I have argued it against myself for 3 weeks in the dark. Forced perspective, that is the whole of it, and it is nearly enough. A tall Confederate placed astride nearer the lens than the crowd behind him will loom over ordinary men without any trickery at all. Every carnival on earth has used the effect, and the wet plate camera, with its shallow field and its long stare, exaggerates it cruelly. Doctor the plate a little, mask, re-expose, print through a second negative, and you can raise 5 figures a head and shoulders above a fairground, and no chemistry of the 1880s could prove you did it. The stillness the skeptics explain more simply still. The family stood while the crowd moved, and a 5-second exposure will freeze the patient and smear the restless into ghosts. I find all of this persuasive. I want you to understand that I find it persuasive because a man who cannot feel the weight of the ordinary explanation has no business handling the strange one. But forced perspective does not cut a line out of a state registry. A doctored plate does not give a clerk a ringing in his skull that ends him in 18 months. A trick of the lens does not empty a stereograph dealer's advertisement after a single week, or send a committeeman fleeing to another state, or make a paid-for commemorative album evaporate with the money still in the printer's hands. You can explain the image, I concede the image, or half of it. What no one has ever explained to me is the wake, the identical fingerprint pressed onto every separate life that brushed against these 5 bodies. Hoaxers are proud. Hoaxers sell the trick, run the advertisement a second week, print the album, sign their names. The men around the long kindred did the opposite of everything a hoaxer does. They ran. They went silent. They let the record be cut rather than defend the sale. That is not the behavior of people who staged a marvel. That is the behavior of people who saw one and understood that being known to have seen it was the danger. So I come back, as I always come back, to the plate itself. 5 figures, long and narrow and unsmiling, standing head and shoulders into the summer light, while the whole living crowd around them dissolves into motion. I have looked at this photograph until I no longer trust my own eyes, and it is not the height that keeps me awake now. It is the faces in the crowd, because they are turned, not toward the camera, not toward each other, not toward any stage or spectacle the fairground offered. Every upturned face in that blur is angled the same way, tilted back and to the left, past the tall ones, past the gas lamp, up into a corner of the sky the lens did not record and the plate did not keep. Whatever the long kindred were, the crowd is not looking at them. The crowd is looking at what they were looking at, and that is where the paper runs out. There is no next document. There is no album, no registry line, no second advertisement, no deathbed letter that turns the corner and tells me what stood above that fairground on a summer afternoon in 1889 and drew 500 faces upward at once. The men who could have told me all died of headaches and moved to Ohio and let their negatives burn. The record was cut before it could answer. I am left with a single misfiled duplicate, 100 small deniable silences, and a photograph of people looking up. 5 figures too still to be alive, standing in silver light more than a century gone, and every ordinary face around them turned toward the same empty patch of sky. What did they see up there? And when the plate closed, and the crowd went home, and the pages were trimmed away one by one, did it turn and follow them down?